As Joe said, tonight we are going to talk about a subject that I think is very important for the understanding of life and the understanding of ourselves. When we look at life, we see that there is a lot of differences in the opportunities that people have, in the situations that people are born in. Some are born in a rich family, some are born in a slum, or some in a country that is developing, and some in countries where there is war. Some other people are born with health, while others are born with a lot of limitations. So many people ask, why is this? Is there a sense, a reason why a person seems to be given so much and another person seems to be put in such difficult situations? And in humanity, we have developed different approaches, different theories. The scientific approach is that there is no reason, it's just, chance. You are born wherever you are born. And where you are is the result of your genes and the result of your environment. So if you are born from, parents that have some problems, whether psychological or physiological, you are likely to inherit them. And if you are born in a difficult environment, you are likely to just copy that kind of environment. Of course, we know that some people can go beyond that. But then the idea is that there is no particular reason. Then we have a religious view, especially a more Western approach, and it is said, well, there is a God, and for some reason God sends a soul here and there, and he must have a reason. Some people have a hard time accepting this. As I mentioned in the previous talk, if we all are supposed to be sons of God, and God sends one of his sons to a very difficult environment with the child being in touch with aggression, lack of love, lack of opportunities, it is likely that that person will have a harder time to be a good person than another that was born in a loving family. And then if this person is not a good person, he may be, condemned to go to hell. So many people rebel against that idea. Why would God send a son to this difficult situation, and why he would blame him? Because he couldn't do anything better. But the idea is that God's ways are mysterious, so we don't know why. Of course, there are different approaches to this model also, but basically that's how most people perceive the idea of God and the situations of different people. And then there is a third explanation, which is related to what in the East is usually called karma. The idea is that everything is the effect of a previous cause. So a person is born in a particular environment as a result of causes created by that person in the past. Of course, in this particular approach, you have to take into consideration the idea of reincarnation. The idea that the soul, this is not the first time that the soul takes a body and is born into the world. The soul is born into the world for a while, and then, as we are going to see in the next two talks, after death, there is a whole process that the soul goes through until it takes a body again in a new birth. Now, all these different births are connected by this law of karma. So the idea is that everything that happens in this particular model in this particular theory, everything that happens has a reason, has a cause. So there is no unfairness if we look at the whole. The word karma is from the Sanskrit, although it has been incorporated in English. You can find it in dictionaries now. But originally comes from the Sanskrit, and it means action, simply action. And the idea is that when somebody says, well, this is your karma, the idea is this is your action or the result of your action. You know, when somebody does something, our son or daughter does something, and as a result of that, some effect comes. You say, well, it's your responsibility. This is your action. This is what, led you to this particular situation. So the idea of karma, meaning action, is something like that. Whatever happens is something that in some way or the other we did. Now again, when we say we, who is that we? Because Pablo, this body, these emotions, this mind, was not or didn't have a previous life. This is the first life for this body, as we saw last week when talking about reincarnation. But the essence of consciousness, the consciousness that is behind this body, emotions, and mind, is the same consciousness that took a different body, maybe as a woman in a different country with a different culture. So the idea is that everything, the situation in which we are born is the result of our previous actions. This brings forth the idea of personal responsibility, because we are not, we are what we are doing and what we were doing of ourselves in the past. Just like in regular life. If we go to school and then, go to college or learn some different skills, then when we are adults, we will have certain opportunities of job and social opportunities. If we neglected that, then in the future, we may be in trouble. Now, the future was produced by our own actions in the past. The problem is that it is difficult to see this because we don't remember the past. We also talked about this, this physical brain wasn't in the past, so the physical brain doesn't have the memory. It is like if we had a very short-term memory. So we eat a lot, then we have, more than we should, and then we forget that we ate a lot. We can remember only 5 minutes, in the past. So after 5 minutes, we forget. And then we have a terrible stomachache, and we assume that was God's design, we are being punished, or it was random. One day you have a stomachache, the next day you don't have it. Now, the problem is that this particular view it prevents us from understanding how things work. We need to know that if we overeat, then we may have a stomachache. If we don't have this concept, it's much harder to learn how to live. Now, as we said, this learning about what happened in previous lives is not necessarily having the memory of what happens in previous lives. We are going to see a little bit more about this, but the idea is that we have to start trying to look at life and see whether there is an order behind everything or not. The first step to see if there is an order is to have a certain knowledge of the theory, the possibility of an order. If we have no idea that, well, there may be something such as the law of cause and effect, it will be very difficult to learn it by ourselves. Now, if we study these things, then we can study, think about it, and start looking at life and see if, to a certain extent, we can see that this is in the way that the books describe. Of course, as I frequently say, any explanation of truth is limited. Truth is something that is beyond the realm of words. So any theory will be limited. But some theories may help us better than others to live in the right way. And for some people, the idea of karma may be, completely unappealing, and they are very devout, and they are perfectly happy thinking there is a God that knows better than I do what he has to put on my way, and I just surrender to God, and I'm perfectly happy with that. And for that kind of people, they don't need to study about karma. After all, if karma exists, it exists regardless of what we believe. And as long as we live the right way, the right kind of life, then what we believe is secondary, is of a secondary matter. But if knowing about karma, for example, helps us make sense of things that are difficult for us to understand and help us have a different life, then we can embrace that theory if that works for us. Any idea that we make about life is, ultimately speaking, just an idea. Whether there is karma or random situations or a God or whatever other idea, well, it's an idea. So we have to choose between different ideas. Choose the one that really works for you to help you lead a better life. In my case, I personally, this idea of karma makes a lot of sense. And in the Theosophical view, it's part of the usual worldview or about life. So I'm sharing the Theosophical view about this. So now the idea is that karma is this law of cause and effect. We do something and we receive the effects of that. Now the first thing we should keep in mind is that sometimes people think of karma more or less in the same way as they were thinking about God, with the ideas of reward and punishment. So some people will think, I'm suffering now because karma is punishing me. Just the same idea with God. But we wouldn't say if we throw a stone in the air and stay there and the stone falls on our head, we wouldn't say that the law of gravity is punishing us. No, it's just a law, impersonal. We produce an action, and there was a reaction. It's just that. So the idea with karma is that it is a very natural law. We do something, and because everything is connected, that produces a result. In physics, we have the third law of Newton. For every action, we get an equal reaction, equal in quality and opposed in direction. So. And that's just a law. So with karma, it's something similar. We do something, and we generate that very action generates an effect that is related to the cause. Actually, cause and effect are not really separated. For example, eating too much is not different from the effect of having a stomachache, because it is the very act of eating too much that produces a stomachache. They are not separated. So we have to keep that in mind with karma. If we do something, the effect that comes, it may take years or lifetimes to come, but they are not things that are separated. They are exactly the same set of actions. Just like the stone. I throw a stone, not too high, and the effect will come in 1 second. I throw it really high, the effect will come in 15 seconds. But the difference in time doesn't mean that the coming down of the stone is an unrelated act with the throwing the stone up. This is important in the sense that when we deal with karma, it's easy to forget or to see it as if causes and effects were disconnected and there was some agency assigning, an effect for each cause. The other problem that makes this difficult to understand is that when we talk about law, the law of karma or the law of cause and effect, many times we think of law in terms of human laws. There is a difference between human law and natural law. The human law is arbitrary. For example, what's the punishment for stealing? Well, it depends on the country. In some countries you will have a fine, you will go to jail for a little bit, you will have your hand cut off. The result is not naturally related to the cause. You stole something and some agency from outside determines, a particular result. They are not really connected. But this is not what happens with karma. With karma, the result is of exactly the same nature of the cause. It's not that these things are assigned like from outside. Now, since life is so complex, one action is adding to a sea of actions, and they produce a set of effects that are all interrelated. So it is difficult to pinpoint, okay, this is a result of this in particular. It's like if you are in a laboratory and you have a recipient, a vessel with water and different compounds, and you throw something there, and that will interact with everything that is there already. If you throw only one compound, it will have a particular effect. But when you throw it and there are other compounds there, the effect will be different. So karma is kind of complex. But there are some principles that it is said that are at work here. There are some people who claim to be able to see previous lives, clairvoyant people. And they can, according to their skills, they can follow different lives and study, just as the scientists do, study, the life of a person, and they can see certain patterns. But just as in medicine, we can see that if you eat bad food, you end up with ill health, generally speaking. But there are some people that eat very well and they still have ill health, or some people that eat very bad and they die, with a relatively good health. So you can see patterns, but the body is so complex that there are many other factors there. So the same with karma. But basically the idea is that everything that happens is a direct result of a previous cause. And this law, as I said, is impersonal. It's not that there is a God using this law. In the theosophical view, you can, because the idea of God is not incompatible with karma. You could think, okay, karma is the expression of the intelligence of God. That's perfectly fine. There are different ways of seeing it, but usually in the theosophical view, although there is the idea of a universal mind, universal intelligence, there is not so much the idea of a personal God. But there are personal entities or beings or angels, devas, enlightened beings that are helping in the working of nature. But we cannot go into this right now. But my point is that even though the law is impersonal, it is not mechanical. I put the example of the law of gravity. Now, the law of gravity, in the way we conceive it, is something completely blind and mechanical. Now, the idea of karma is that it is a different concept. The idea of universal laws in the theosophical view is not that there is a conscious being, manipulating the laws of the universe, but it's not either a blind mechanical law that has no intelligence. What the theosophical view proposes is a different model that is difficult to understand because it doesn't belong to these two categories. It's like a different approach. And the idea is that although this law is impersonal, it has a name. It has an intelligence. It has a purpose. It's not merely blind and mechanical. And the purpose of the law of karma is that we can discover who we really are. That human beings can learn the truth about the universe, which is ultimately speaking the truth about ourselves. So there is a purpose in this process of karma. And this is important, as we are going to see. Now, another subject that is usually related to karma is the idea of, can karma be forgiven? Or can we erase a karma? We are going to see that karma can be changed, but in a particular way, not in the sense. Okay, let me first say, in the Theosophical view, karma cannot be forgiven or erased. There are several reasons why. First, because it is a universal law, not a human law. If we are talking about a human law, well, yeah, somebody stole something, but he was, he knew the judge, and the judge said, okay, let us forgive him. Or he was, cute, and the judge said, okay, poor guy, we will forgive him. The human law can be forgiven. Somebody can say, okay, this is it. But not with the universal laws. The universal laws are impersonal and just, and they always act. You cannot be forgiven the law of gravity. If you step, out of a building, you will fall. Now, there are some ways you can manipulate nature to counteract the law of gravity. We have aeroplanes that they counteract the law of gravity. But they do it by using the law of gravity and some other laws. So you can change your karma, but that requires a particular kind of action that we are going to see. And that doesn't defeat the purpose of karma. Because if we think that karma can be forgiven, that defeats the purpose of it. For example, if we do something that we call wrong, and that produces a kind of suffering, then if it were possible by means of bathing ourselves in the Ganges, like in Hinduism, some people would say, okay, if you bathe yourself in the Ganges, you can erase the karma of 100 lives. Or by visualizing some kind of color, or by going to a priest or a guru and ask him to remove the karma. If by this means we can erase the karma, then what's the meaning of karma? Why would be karma at all if it can be so easily forgiven? It would be a cruelty. To me, it's a cruelty that karma exists and that suffering falls upon people if there are means to prevent that suffering. Very easy means, just like, okay, go take a swim in the Ganges. Or it's like saying, then suffering is meaningless. What's the purpose of suffering? It's just a punishment. Again, the idea behind is that it is a punishment, and we can appeal to whoever is, giving the punishment and say, please, okay, I won't do it anymore, don't let me suffer. Then the suffering is not really meaningful in that sense. But if karma has a purpose, when it brings suffering or it brings joy, then that karma cannot be erased. In the sense that, for example, you send your kids to school. For them it's a suffering. They would I used to say they would stay playing with their friends. Probably they would stay playing at the PlayStation or texting or something instead of going to school. But you know that they have to go to school because that's part of their growth. Now, if school were not necessary, and you say, yeah, you don't need to go to school, that's fine, you can grow by other means, then why would you send them to school in the first place, if there is some other way? So the idea is that suffering and joy, they have a very important purpose in life, very important purpose. It is through suffering and joy and the experiences that we learn what is unreal, and therefore we perceive what is real. Every time that something happens to us, if we are with the right kind of mind, we can learn what is real and what is unreal. If we are not, we will learn it after death, but we are going to see that in a few minutes. Now, no, in the next talk. Now, if we can learn during life, then we grow much faster. We don't need to wait to learn it after death. That, for the most part, then we forget, and we have to go through several times the same experience in order to impress it in our memory. But then the idea of karma, as I said, and everything that happens, is that we learn from it. So how would, and we can see it in life, we are unkind to people, then we get the reaction from people, that reaction produces a suffering, we don't like suffering, and then we question ourselves if we should be unkind. At the beginning, it's just out of, looking for a pleasurable sensation. Pleasure and pain is a way that nature uses to teach consciousness when consciousness is in a body that cannot see the whole. It's through pain and pleasure that we learn. For example, with the example of the food. If we had never a stomachache after eating too much, why would we stop eating too much? We stop only because there is a stomachache or a problem, with our health. That's the way we learn. If a God would come and say, yeah, poor thing, I don't want you to suffer, just eat all you want and I will erase the suffering, then we would die. We would die because suffering is what is helping us know what's the right thing to do. Now, we can change karma because this doesn't mean fatalism, that, this is your fate and there's nothing you can do about it. Oh no, if I eat too much and I get a stomachache, I can learn, that this is not the right thing to do, and I can start trying to change my behavior. By changing the behavior, I can change the result. That is, I start eating I'm not doomed to overeat every time and then getting a stomachache every time. I have free will, relatively speaking, and I can change my behavior, and then I will change the result. So if I eat, and even, if I was eating bad for a certain amount of years, and at a certain point I start eating better, then I can bring order to my body again, and in a few years I can recover for whatever harm I may have done to the body. So in the same way, we are not doomed to suffer certain things. We can change the effects by doing exactly the same opposite action. So, for example, if we have been aggressive in past lives, that will produce a certain environment where we will be in situations of conflict. Now, we are not doomed to suffer that without being able to do anything about it. We can start changing our behavior, and eventually the environment will change. Now, also it depends on how strong the causes that we produced are. Sometimes a cause will take, a lot of effort to be reversed, and sometimes causes are very, very weak, and with a little effort we can change things. It all depends on how high you threw the stone. If it wasn't too high, it won't hurt much. If it was really high and you don't move out of the way, it will hurt more. It depends on the original cause. But the idea is, if we do the right thing, try to do the right thing at every moment, that is changing our karma. We don't know how, we cannot pinpoint the results, we cannot predict how, but we know that if we try to react in the best possible way right now, that is changing our whole karma. And that's all we need to know. And to know the details, I don't think is necessarily useful. So let me talk a little about the mechanism of karma, and then we will open to question and answers as we usually do. The idea is that karma is action. Now, when we say action, we are not talking about only physical actions. There is something as an emotional action or a mental action. Even in the Gospels, we have that Jesus says, when we think ill of somebody or of doing something, we are already committing a sin. The idea is that there is a mental action, there is an emotional action, and a physical action. And karma produces results on these three different levels according to what was a particular action on each level. For example, a typical example is a person that donates money to build a hospital in a city. Now, this person donated money, a hospital was built, and many people can benefit from it. So on a physical level, if we simplify karma, as I said, causes are very complex. But in science, what you do when you try to understand a principle, you try to isolate it and prove, one particular point so that you can understand it. So what I'm doing now is suppose that you don't have any other karma. Let us analyze how things would work. So the person donated money, that was a physical action, and because he gave, in the next life, he will receive. So this person in the next life will probably be born in a country or a family or a situation where he will have money because he donated money. The idea is you give, you receive. You retain, you are taken away from. That's action and reaction, just like in physics. Now, what happens? Why did this person donate that money? That person may have donated it out of compassion because he wants to help people. So the emotional and mental action was unselfish, was to produce happiness in others. So in the next life, not only he will have money, but also he will be happy about it. But if the person did it for selfish purposes, because he wanted to be a politician and he wanted to be well known and people voting him, or for whatever selfish reason, he donated the money, he will have money, but because the mental and emotional actions were selfish, he will be put in a situation where he won't be able to enjoy the money that he has. He will be probably with people who are mean and selfish, and that money will bring him into troubles. So the idea is that according to how we act on all these three different levels, physical, emotional, and mental, is what we are producing for the future. And actually, what we do on the mental level is far more important than what we do on the physical level. Because we see in the world that there are people who have everything that they could ask for on the physical, aspect, but if their minds are not well, or emotionally they are not well, they are not going to be happy. And you have people that live in very precarious conditions, but if their minds are well, if they are mature at the level of their minds, they are perfectly happy. What makes us happy is not the physical environment. It's more how we perceive the world, how we are able to respond to the world. So if anything about these three levels, the most important thing is what we are trying to do at every moment, even more than what we really do. In Buddhism, for example, they have this idea of skandhas. Skandhas are like levels of experience and matter. So, for example, let me draw here these different planes that we are talking about. We have the physical. Let me see. We have the physical level, the emotional. We have the mental level. So in Buddhism, they talk about skandhas. It means like aggregates. I cannot go into details about this, but the idea is that our physical body is part of these skandhas, the sensations, then our emotional responses, then our mental formations, and our will. This is called, in Sanskrit, samskara, this kind of skandha. And they say the only one that produces karma is the samskara, the will. It's that aspect in ourselves from where the intention comes. In the Theosophical view, we would say, well, karma is actually produced on all levels. But the most important aspect is the will, the intention. Because that is what really determines how you are going to go through the situations. For example, I must have killed one in a previous life, and now he's running away from me. Thank you. Yeah, no. So the idea is, for example, what we do there is a situation, and sometimes we try to do something, and the result is different. We try to do our best, and even we made a mistake, or even if we try to do our best, the situation went wrong. The idea is that what actually happens in a situation comes from your past. You cannot change that situation in particular at that moment. If you face a situation, there are many traditions that they say this is a tricky idea, but they say everything is predetermined. So don't fight the situations, because everything that happens was already produced in the past. Now, that idea from a theosophical point of view is relatively true, in the sense that what happens today was produced in the past. Now, your present, the present, is what you are trying to do, what you are intending to do. So there is a situation. We choose how to react to the situation, and we choose if we are aware. If we are unaware and we simply react to circumstances, then we are caught in a cycle where we are not really trying to produce a particular karma. It's not that we are trying to produce a karma, but the point is that when we react mechanically, we are just perpetuating the same cause. Somebody is aggressive to me, I'm aggressive to the person, therefore I produce a karma of aggression. I will be, hurt again, and then I will react again and produce another one until the day that I say, okay, stop. Is this a way to live? Is this a way to react? So when we start thinking, when we stop and start trying to be aware, then we have the possibility of changing the karma. Because then we start saying, okay, what's the right way to answer to this situation? Not the right way that God or Theosophy says, the right way that we can perceive. Then when we try to do the right thing, we are setting a completely different cause. And even if in trying to do the right thing, we cannot change the situation because it brings a karma from the past, we are setting a different cause, and that situation will be the last one. The next situation, we already changed our destiny. So the idea is that what actually happens is the past. What we try to do, even if we don't succeed, is our present. And then that will determine the future. So we are not what we do. We are what we intend to do. What we intend sincerely to do. So if there is a situation of conflict, if we really try to react in the best possible way, even if when coming to the situation we cannot react in a different way, we are already changing the future. because we intended to do something different. And we couldn't because our past didn't allow us to do it. Because the causes produced in the direction of conflict were so strong that even if we want to change it, we may not be able to. Sometimes we are able to. As I said, if the causes are not very strong, with a decision in the moment, we can change that. But if the causes are too strong, they will have to run their course. But the very fact that we try to do it different is changing something in the future. So there is where our power lies. Our power lies in trying to do the right thing at each moment. And then we can be confident that whatever happens is part of the harmony, and be humble about it and say, okay, this happened, it's part of the causes that I generated, and these things led me at this moment to understand that I have to act in a different way. So even though it is not pleasant, it helped me realize something, and it had a purpose. And the moment you realize, something, as I said, you change the future. So that's more or less the idea. The idea is, to me, the main message in the idea of karma is don't feel despair in facing situations. Trust that these situations are part of a higher order, even when they are not pleasant. Try to do your best now, and you have the power to produce a different future. And it's a very simple message. Karma, the whole concept of karma is very complex if you want to study, and that helps you say, yes, I think this is true. But the message is very simple. And eventually we have to get to a place where we don't do anything anymore based on a personal will. I like this, I like that. We do everything we do it because it's the right response, taking the whole into account. When we do that, then we stop generating personal karma. And as we stop generating personal karma, then we can get rid of the chains that are binding us to this cycle of experiences. So we can get rid of karma by acting impersonally, by doing what is required from the moment and not just what I personally like. So of course there are many things that we could talk about, but I think that's the main message that this view gives us. So do you have any questions or comments? Or?
We have a couple. Am I on?
Okay.
On?
Yeah.
We have a couple on the internet too.
Okay, let us start from the internet and then we'll go to...
Right. What I wanted to ask you to go just a step further in is about when our karma is exhausted. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes we just have to have the strength and the endurance to keep going, and then when it's exhausted, it's like bam, and mm-hmm. things can change instantly. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, we have to keep in mind always that there is a reason. There is a reason for joy and suffering, and when a situation is going on, there is a reason for that. It's not a punishment. It's not, something that is thrown upon us without any purpose other than punish. So, of course, we can always try to do the right thing in a situation. It's not that we have to, if we are in an unhealthy relationship, if we can try to solve that, we should try to solve it. If a person is being abused, it's not that person has to say, okay, it's my karma, whatever. No, we can try to redress or redirect the situations, but always remembering that if we can't change the situation, that's because there is a purpose there, and our duty is to react in the best possible way, not in the perfect way. We can have in view what is our ideal of perfection so that we know where, more or less in what direction we should go. But our duty is to react in the best possible way, even if it is not good enough. It doesn't matter. Trying to react in the best possible way breaks the cycle and begins to generate different causes. And the situation will end, when the karma is exhausted. And when the karma is exhausted means when we really understood or had the experience to change.
Okay. From the internet, what is the karmic reason for physical suffering?
Well, all suffering, not only physical, it's, to me, suffering has several purposes. One is to teach consciousness how things work. We put our finger in the fire and it burns, and then we learn don't put the finger in the fire. Many times, at this level of consciousness, we cannot learn why this is happening to me right now. But when we die, the soul, as we are going to see in the next 2 talks, when we die is the real period of learning for most people. So the soul begins to examine the life, and in a very impersonal way, because the soul is beyond personal reactions, it begins to understand how things work. So a person killed another. The soul, it's not the soul the one that killed. As we said in the last talk, our personality, physical body, emotions, mind, the soul is trying to direct the personality, but the personality has a life on its own. And many times it will do things that the soul would not want to do. And many times the soul gets frustrated, so to say, and says, okay, I cannot do anything with the personality, and just let the personality act. But then after life, the soul understands, okay, this is, produces this. And according to how mature the soul is and how receptive the personality is, sometimes the soul can learn from one experience in one life, and sometimes it needs several experiences. But the idea of physical suffering is to teach, the laws, these laws. If we don't take care of our physical body or other people's physical body, then we may have some consequences. But always remember that as we generate karma, I didn't have time to deal with this, but most of the karma is accumulated. So especially at the beginning of human evolution, because it's like a kid. A kid makes a lot of mistakes. Eventually, when he grows, if he grows in a healthy adult, he doesn't make so many mistakes, as a kid, generally speaking, at least at the physical level, let's say. But the soul at the beginning makes a lot of mistakes because it doesn't know what this is about. And most of the karma is held for the future when the soul is able to learn. So many of the things that we are suffering right now may have been produced, hundreds of lives in the past. It's not that, I have a physical difficulty now, it's because I was bad in my previous life, or I'm bad now. These ideas should not be there. The idea is that in the journey of the soul, many things happen. As I said, it's very difficult to pinpoint, and our attitude should be, there is a reason for this, there is something to be developed, something to be purified, something to be learned. I will go through this trying to do the best that I can. Many times suffering is just producing strength. When we go through suffering in a spiritual way, we develop a lot of strength. And that may be the whole purpose. So
karma isn't always payback for something. Sometimes, because you touch on that, sometimes it's purifying.
Yeah. It depends on our attitude. For some people, I would say on a practical level, karma is just, or suffering is just a punishment. Because they suffer and they don't get anything from it. They get more resented, they get more, hurt, and at the level of the personality, they don't get anything from that. The soul will learn, but at the personal level of experience, it's just a punishment. But for more spiritual people who are trying to learn about life, suffering, it's many times your best friend, your best teacher. Not pleasant, but it's a blessing in disguise. It is through suffering that we grow, that we develop compassion, wisdom, that allows us to live in a far, deeper way in the future. So it depends on our attitude.
Okay, and I think you touched on this one. Why do we have to wait until the next lifetime to experience karma?
Yeah. No, sometimes karma also comes right away. It depends, because, for example, if we are many times very contradictory, self-contradictory, and we produce opposite causes. So sometimes these two causes require two opposite conditions, and they cannot be fulfilled in the same lifetime. So, one has to be fulfilled, or one set in one lifetime, the next one in another lifetime. But as a person begins to be more coherent, and the direction begins to be more clear, and all the actions of the person goes more or less in the same direction, then karma begins to be much more orderly. Karma begins to have a much more clearer action, because a person stopped producing contradictory, actions. So many times, if the effect can come immediately, it will come. But many times it has to be accumulated and wait for the right conditions.
Okay, do we have other
Okay, so we have
questions?
there, and
No,
Diane.
I know, raise your hand if you have a question.
Yeah, we have 4 people.
As you said, karma is complex, but I'm interested in the interplay between karma and elementals. So if you're creating karma in the long term, is the elemental more of the short term, I guess, analogy of that? So thoughts creating an elemental that's more short term acting in this iteration. And then is there some law governing elementals being able to follow you between iterations? And then also, is there any impact on karma on intent? Because you say intent being the litmus test. Is intent untouchable? Is that something that's not able to be impacted by previous experiences? So intent is somehow infallible and can be touched, or is intent able to be skewed by either elementals or karma? Because I know a lot of people have pure intent but repeat the same actions over and over and over and over and over again. So for example, with alcoholism or something, some of the greatest people wake up every day wanting to be a good human being, but it just doesn't materialize.
The idea of elementals, I cannot go too much into this right now, but the idea of elementals is like energies which have a certain consciousness. For those who know what elementals are, the idea is that elementals are vehicles of karma. Karma works through the elementals. So that's how karma actually manifests itself in the life of people. Now, the second, the intention is always conditioned by the circumstances, by how receptive the personality is to the real consciousness, by many things. But the limitations that the intent has is also part of the karma. So that's why I said all that is required from us is the best possible intention, not the best intention, the best possible intention. When a person has the best possible intention, is doing all that is required from that person. It couldn't be expected anything more. And in the case of, for example, a person that is alcoholic, many times it depends on how strong that skandha, that habit is in the body. So the person may have to try several times until all these new causes can counteract the effects that was produced in the past. So nobody knows how many times we have to try. I always say, if we have a particular reaction, to anger or sadness or this or that, we put an X amount of energy there. And that energy will have to be exhausted. Now, if every time that energy presents itself, we try to do the best we can, then not only that we are not feeding that reaction, but we are exhausting it little by little. Now, because some people get frustrated. They say, I'm doing all I can not to react in this way, and yet I keep reacting, so I'm failing. No, you are not failing. But if that reaction has an X amount of energy, it will have to be exhausted. So you will be meant to react X amount of times, but it will disappear. It's like if there is a car that has a certain speed, and then you start trying to stop it, it has an inertia. So at the beginning you are making a lot of, trying to stop it and putting a lot of effort, and you don't see that the car stops. But it is stopping, and eventually it will stop. And then when it stops completely is when we see the effect. So yes, intent is conditioned, but that's fine. We have to do the best we can.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just have one question.
Wait.
Okay, I just wondered basically if you could give me an example between the difference between good karma and bad karma. I've heard that there's nothing good about karma at all. Even good karma is bad karma. So could you give me an example of having good karma opposed to having bad karma?
Yeah, it all depends on what we mean by that. You could say all karma is good. You could say all karma is bad, or is neither. For example, usually what we say is good karma is simply pleasant karma. What brings pleasure, we call it good karma. What brings suffering, we call it bad karma. That's fine, if you want to do that. But remember, suffering may be far more important than pleasure. Pleasure puts us to sleep. It's very nice, but when we are in a harmonious state, that's it. We are like vegetables. Nothing happens. So it's nice. It's a respite, but yeah, there is not necessarily growth. Although there can be growth also in pleasure, but many times it just puts us to sleep. And suffering is what is calling forth all the potentialities that are in us. Because it is, for most people, it is when we have a challenge that we pull our resources and we try to do. So from that point of view, we should say, for many times the good karma is the unpleasant one, and the bad karma is the pleasant one, if by that. Now, from a different point of view, we could say any karma is bad in the sense that karma keeps us bound to the realm of suffering and pleasure. When we generate good karma, it is because we do a good action, but still from a personal level. For example, we give this money to the hospital and we really want to help people, but also there is a personal intent there. There is a personal element, which is perfectly fine. I'm not saying, most of us are at that level. But that will produce good results, which means that the soul, because the soul desires those good results, will be drawn again to the cycle of incarnation. Now, when the soul begins to act in an impersonal way, when the soul doesn't need the things that the world can give you, then you stop producing karma. And it is only when we stop producing karma that the spiritual bliss begins to really be experienced. We experience pleasure and pain, but there is a third state, which we could call bliss or whatever you want to call it, which is beyond pleasure and pain. Now, this bliss comes as we grow in impersonality, because that is the nature of our real nature, our real aspect. So from that point of view, you could say any karma binds. Good karma is more pleasant, bad karma is unpleasant, but eventually what is best is to be beyond the realm of karma and the realm of personal action.
So an example of good and bad karma could be if you have to go through a difficult time in your life, but life sends you somebody to help you. So that would be an example of good and bad.
I think that, for example, this question of the motivation and the different levels of action, it's very frequent because we are learning that many times we we have the best of our intentions, and yet we do something wrong. Either with our children, with our parents, with our friends, in our job, because we are learning. We don't know how things work. We had the best of the intentions, but we did it in the wrong way. So that will produce, how are we going to learn? Well, we learn by being in a similar situation and suffering the results of our wrong action. But because the intention was the right one, that suffering will produce a very good effect, will produce wisdom, will produce understanding. Now, if we did something wrong with a wrong intention, because we wanted to hurt the person, or then that will produce the same suffering as in the first, example, but we won't get anything from it at the personal level. The soul will see, I cannot do this, or let the personality do this. But when our intention is the right one, the suffering is still good karma. Unpleasant, but still good karma. I would say if there is a bad karma from the personal point of view, is when the intention was wrong, so the suffering is perceived as a punishment.
Okay. Did somebody appear to-
Diane, I think, okay, you and then Diane.
All right, I'm going to make this in two parts this time so you don't have to come back to me. All right, two of the things that appealed to me when I was first learning about reincarnation, and one was paraphrase a comedian years ago. He was asked a question in the newspaper about had he ever considered suicide, and his response was, well, I had, but I believe in reincarnation, so it'll only be a temporary solution to my problems. I spoke to a past life regressionist one time, and he said that suicide is not a way to get out of life because you're bound to come back, and when you come back, it's going to be worse. I wanted to know your thoughts on that, but before that, the hospital thing. Okay, let's go a little further with that. You're a rich person, and all the money you have is stolen, and you want to see your name in lights, so they name a big hospital after you. Doesn't that karma go over with the intentions being bad intentions to the material hospital and the subsequent things that happen with the care of the people in the hospital not being from a sincere?
Well, it's difficult for me to tell. The principle would be that, a person is asking for...
It's like the means justifying the ends.
Yeah.
I mean, the end justifying the...
Yeah, the end justifying the means.
See, I don't buy that.
No. Because the thing is, in this case would be, if I donate the money, the hospital has nothing to do with why I did it. Now, if somebody in the hospital, use wrong means to acquire that money, then yes, that I would think would affect the hospital. Now, if I gave my money freely, the hospital was not trying to co-act on myself or trying to push me in any way. Even if I did it for selfish reasons, I am the one that is going to receive the effect on the selfish level, not the hospital. They didn't do anything. So I would think that that's the way more or less it would work. Now, regarding the first question, we are going to deal with that next talk quite a bit. But not only that suicide is not a good idea for your next life, but also when we kill the physical body, we are only killing the physical body. We are still alive on the emotional and mental bodies. And those are what in general culture is called, the earthbound people, because they are alive without a physical body. And then they cannot go through the post-mortem processes that they should go through. And that, according to why the person committed suicide, how pure the person was, according to different things, it can be a distressful experience. But again, there are different rules according to why the person did it, the circumstances, how, several things.
But if you could convey that to somebody that has those thoughts, and if they understood that their suffering isn't going to end, and that it's just going to be compounded, if you could convey that to people that are in that state of mind, and if you could get them to reconsider.
Yeah, we will talk about that. He's saying if we could show people that is not going to solve their problems. No, not at all. It's not going to solve the problems. On the contrary, it will get more, more difficult. But we are going to deal with that in the next two talks.
Trying to word this, karma is not just, in other words, I don't just live for Diane. When somebody approaches me or I'm in a relationship to somebody, it's also someone else's karma. So it may not be, it may be the two of us to work out certain things. And there is a certain awareness, but we may not know what that is.
Yeah, I didn't have time to go through that, but there is what we could call personal karma, which is never absolutely personal because we are not isolated. And there is what sometimes is called distributive karma. It's like a more group karma that may belong to the family, to the nation, to the race, because we are not really separate from anything. We are relatively separate. It's like, if we could say we have something like this, these things is what we call, these things is what we could call individuals, but they are part of the whole. So nothing that affects this doesn't really affect the whole. And nothing that affects the whole is not affecting the part. So we are just condensations of the one consciousness or the one energy. And everything is connected. So there is nothing that is completely isolated personal karma. And karma is more complex. That's why I'm saying I'm trying to convey the principles in a simpler way so that we understand the principles. Then if you want to go deeper, there are many details that you can see, but essentially the principles, I think, are what I was conveying.
Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, so thank you all, and next time we will talk about dying and the process after death and the process of coming back to a body.